Every woman at the gala turned him down. Whispers followed Adrian Cole everywhere he went, about his supposed downfall, his failed engagement, and the fortune he was about to lose. By the end of the night, the city's most sought-after millionaire sat alone in the courtyard, invisible in a room where he once commanded every glance. That's when a young janitor in a faded uniform stopped, handed him a glass of water, and quietly asked, "Are you okay?" She didn't know who he was. She didn't care. And she had no idea that one small act of kindness would change both of their lives forever. Before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. The ballroom of the Grand Astoria glittered in gold and glass, every chandelier burning like a sun suspended above a sea of sequined gowns and polished shoes. The annual Winter Charity Gala was supposed to be Adrian Cole's stage. His company sponsored the event, his name was on the banners, and the beneficiaries, a network of children's hospitals, had counted on his presence to draw in the biggest donors. But tonight, his name was a whisper for all the wrong reasons. 3 weeks earlier, a finance blog had posted an unverified article claiming Cole Industries was on the verge of collapse. The speculation spread like wildfire, twisting with older gossip, that his fiancée had left him for a rival investor, that his recent absence from the social circuit was a sign of retreat, that his fortune was nothing but smoke and mirrors. He could have refuted it all. He had the evidence, the numbers, but after years of feeding a hungry press, he'd decided silence would speak louder. It also meant walking into this ballroom tonight was like stepping into a minefield. He'd been approached at first by women in velvet and silk, smiles sharp enough to cut glass, but the conversations lasted seconds. As soon as they caught the faintest shadow in his expression, or noticed the empty place on his arm where a diamond used to shine, they excused themselves with polite cruelty. Some didn't bother with politeness. Others whispered within earshot, as if daring him to hear. By the third rejection, he'd stopped making an effort. An hour later, he found himself in the farthest corner of the courtyard, where the hum of string music dulled under the hush of winter air. Snowflakes drifted past the warm light spilling from the windows, melting on the stone balustrades. He sat on the edge of a low wall, his glass of champagne untouched. His posture relaxed only because holding it tense any longer was exhausting. That was when he noticed her. She wasn't in a gown. No shimmering fabric, no clutch bag, no calculated smile. Just navy work pants, a faded gray zip-up jacket with the hotel's logo, and a cart of cleaning supplies she was pushing across the tiles. She couldn't have been more than late 20s, hair pulled back into a practical braid, a faint smudge of something. Maybe paint, maybe dust, near her temple. She moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who knew how to stay invisible. And yet, she stopped when she saw him. "You okay?" she asked, as if it was the most natural question in the world. He blinked. No one had asked him that all night. No one had asked him that in weeks without expecting a PR-friendly answer. Her voice didn't have the false concern of a socialite fishing for gossip. It was just steady, simple. He looked down at the glass in his hand, then back at her. "I've been better." She studied him for a beat, then reached for the small cooler balanced on the lower rack of her cart. From it, she pulled a sealed bottle of water, twisted the cap, and handed it over. "Champagne looks nice in pictures," she said, "but it's terrible if you're actually thirsty." Despite himself, he smiled. "Thanks." "No problem." She started to turn back to her cart, then hesitated. "You're not one of the guests, are you? I mean, you don't look like you're waiting for someone." "Something like that," he said vaguely. And you? She huffed a short laugh. I work here. Ava Collins. She gestured to the badge pinned near her shoulder. Official title, janitorial services. Unofficial title, keeper of spare water bottles and bad jokes. Her honesty was oddly disarming. Most people in his world introduced themselves with a resume or a handshake calculated for effect. Well, Ava Collins, he said, you might have just saved my evening. Long night. Long year. She nodded, as if that was an answer she understood well enough not to pry into. The conversation could have ended there, but she lingered for a moment longer, leaning on the handle of her cart. In the faint golden light, her eyes looked almost amber, clear and unflinching. Try not to freeze out here, she said finally. Snow's pretty, but it's not worth catching pneumonia. With that, she wheeled the cart away, disappearing down a service hallway. Adrian sat there with the bottle of water still in his hand, the cap warm from her touch. He didn't know why it mattered, or why her absence left the courtyard feeling quieter than before. Inside, the gala rolled on. The music swelled. Glasses clinked. The donors laughed at each other's stories. And for the first time in years, Adrian Cole didn't feel like joining them. He stayed outside, thinking of amber eyes and a voice that asked nothing except if he was okay. Adrian didn't plan to go back inside. The ballroom had become a theater of polished masks, every glance a calculation, every word a subtle probe into what he could still offer. He'd hosted this gala for years, but tonight, the stage lights felt hostile, too bright on a man whose private life had been torn apart in public. He could have left, slipped out the side door, called his driver, and vanished into the city. No one would notice. No one would ask where he'd gone, except maybe the woman with the janitor's badge who had handed him water like it mattered. It wasn't just the water. It was the way she had looked at him with nothing to gain. The way she had spoken to him like he wasn't a headline or a bank account or a cautionary tale. Just a man who might not be okay. He stayed in the courtyard a little longer, letting the snow sting his cheeks, until the cold worked its way through the fine wool of his suit. The champagne in his glass had gone flat. He left it on the balustrade, twisted the cap back onto the water bottle, and walked toward the service hallway where she disappeared. The door wasn't locked. Inside, the noise of the gala muted to a low hum, replaced by the distant whir of a floor buffer somewhere down the corridor. The air smelled faintly of cleaning solution and coffee gone stale. He almost turned back until he saw her. Ava was kneeling beside a tall brass trash bin, changing the liner with practiced speed. She looked up when his footsteps echoed, one eyebrow lifting in mild surprise. "Lose your way?" she asked. "Not exactly," Adrian said. "I was looking for you." That earned him a small, puzzled smile. "Careful. I'm expensive company, at least in cleaning supplies." He chuckled, stepping closer. "I just wanted to say thanks. For earlier. It was just water. It was more than that." Her gaze lingered on him, as if trying to decide whether he was sincere or performing some rich man's charm. "You don't seem like the kind of guy who struggles to find company at a party like that." "I wasn't struggling to find company," he said quietly. "I was struggling to find someone who cared whether I was in the room or not." For a moment, the only sound was the low thrum of the buffer in a distant hallway. Ava leaned back on her heels, the bag of trash liner crinkling in her hands. "You're having one of those nights, huh?" she said finally. "One of those years." She studied him for a beat, then stood, dusting her hands on her jacket. I get it. Not the rich guy part, but the part where you walk into a room and realize you could disappear and it wouldn't matter. The words landed sharper than he expected. You felt that? Who hasn't? She said with a shrug. Except maybe the people in that ballroom. He smiled faintly. You might be right. They stood there for a moment. Two people from different worlds, sharing the same quiet corridor as if it were neutral ground. Then Ava broke the spell. I've got another floor to do before midnight. You probably have guests waiting. No one's waiting for me, Adrian said. She gave him a look that was part disbelief, part something else he couldn't name. Well, in that case, you're welcome to help me mop. He almost laughed. Almost, I'd ruin your floors. That's a shame. Could have been a good icebreaker. She moved past him, cart rattling slightly over the tiles, and he followed her to the service elevator without really deciding to. They rode up in silence, Ava leaning against the cart handle, Adrian watching the floor numbers glow and fade. On the 12th floor, the doors opened to a quieter hallway lined with guest suites. Soft jazz filtered from somewhere down the corridor. Ava rolled her cart toward a supply closet. You always work these events? Adrian asked. Most of them, she said, snapping open the closet door. Holiday tips help cover my brother's college books. And it's a good way to avoid pretending to enjoy small talk. Sounds like tonight, he said. She shot him a glance over her shoulder, and he wondered if he'd pushed too far. But then she smirked. Guess we both found our escape route. They spent the next few minutes in companionable silence while she worked, changing bins and wiping down marble surfaces that gleamed even without attention. Adrian offered to carry the trash bag to the chute. She let him with a bemused shake of her head. When they finished the floor, she checked her watch. Almost midnight. The party downstairs will be winding down soon. You should probably make your exit before the vultures start sniffing around again. He didn't ask how she knew about the vultures. She seemed like the kind of person who noticed more than she let on. I'll walk you back to the service hall, she offered. They took the elevator down together, and when the doors slid open to the familiar muted hum of the backstage corridors, Adrian felt something odd. The smallest pull to stay in this world a little longer, the one where Ava Collins moved through shadows without apology. At the door that led back to the courtyard, he paused. Will I see you again? Depends, she said, propping the cart against the wall. You planning on hanging out in service corridors more often? Maybe, he said. She grinned. A quick, unguarded flash that made something tighten in his chest. Then maybe you will. And with that, she pushed her cart away, disappearing around the corner, leaving him with nothing but the faint scent of citrus cleaner and the sound of wheels fading into the distance. Adrian didn't head straight for the ballroom. The thought of stepping back into that gilded cage, under the two bright chandeliers where every sideways glance carried speculation, felt like pressing his hand against a fresh wound. He stayed in the shadows near the coat check, half hidden by the flow of departing guests, his gaze fixed on the service hallway door. From this angle, the golden glare of the main hall couldn't quite reach him. He wasn't sure why he lingered. Ava Collins had probably gone home already. She had seemed like the type to clock out and disappear into her own world. But some quiet part of him, the one that had felt something shift when she handed him that water bottle, wasn't ready to let the connection vanish into the night like steam in the winter air. Around him, the gala wound down. The string quartet had moved on to slower melodies, their bows gliding lazily over strings. The crowd inside was thinning, Couples bundled in expensive coats and scarves made their way to the revolving doors. A few solitary guests lingered at the bar, talking in low voices, their champagne flutes catching the last flickers of candlelight. He caught himself wondering what she would look like outside that uniform, not in the way a man sizes up a woman, but in the way someone imagines a different version of a person entirely. Without the badge, without the cart, without the muted colors meant to blend her into the walls. He wondered if her voice would sound different when she wasn't speaking through the tiredness of a shift. The service door finally opened. Ava stepped out, pushing her cart toward the supply room. She'd shed the navy jacket, revealing a fitted gray sweater with the sleeves pushed to her elbows. Her braid was slightly undone, strands of hair curling against her temples. A faint dampness on her skin made him think she'd washed her face before finishing her rounds. She looked younger this way, but also more certain of herself. Before he could overthink it, he stepped forward. "Ava!" She looked up, her surprise quickly softening into something cautious but not unkind. "You're still here. I was hoping I'd see you before I left." She arched one brow, leaning a little on her cart. "You really don't like parties, do you?" "Not anymore," he admitted, his voice low enough to keep it between them. "Not since I realized how quickly people turn when they think you have nothing to offer." The flicker in her eyes wasn't pity. It was recognition. "One benefit of my job. Most people don't notice me at all. Can't turn on you if they never turned toward you in the first place." "I noticed," he said. For a moment, she held his gaze. He thought he saw something behind it, a question maybe or a defense she didn't bother raising. "So, did you just come over to tell me that?" "No," he said. "I wanted to ask if you'd join me for coffee, somewhere that isn't a service hallway or a courtyard." Her mouth curved into a small, doubtful smile. "You don't strike me as the kind of guy who asks janitors to coffee. And yet, here I am." "You should know," she said. "I'm not exactly coffee date material for someone who—" She stopped herself, waving a hand vaguely at his suit, his shoes, his posture. "Looks like you stepped out of one of those magazines in the lobby. What's a guy like me? Someone who belongs in a ballroom, not sitting in a booth at Lou's Diner with a waitress named Patty asking if you want more pie." "I like pie," he said. Ava gave him a long look, then sighed. "I get off in 10 minutes. There's a place around the corner. It's not glamorous." "Perfect," he said, and meant it. 10 minutes later, they walked out into the cold. Snow had softened into a light powder falling under the glow of street lamps. The city was quieter here, the noise of traffic dulled by the late hour and the weather. The diner's neon sign buzzed faintly, its pink light flickering against the glass door. Inside, the air was warm and smelled faintly of frying oil, strong coffee, and something sweet baking in the kitchen. They chose a booth at the back. Ava ordered tea, Adrian, black coffee. The waitress poured without asking questions, leaving them in the hum of clinking dishes and low conversation from two men at the counter. "So," Ava said after her first sip, "what's your deal, Adrian?" "My deal? You didn't just wander into the service corridor for fun. And you don't seem eager to tell me who you really are." He traced a finger along the rim of his cup. "Let's just say I run a company, a big one. Lately, it feels like that's all people see when they look at me. Must get lonely." "It does." She nodded, as if she'd suspected as much. "Guess we both had reasons to hide tonight." They talked for nearly an hour, about cities they loved, the worst jobs they'd ever had, what it felt like to live in a place that could forget you overnight. He told her about starting his first business at 19. She told him about the mural she'd painted in her high school gym that was still there, faded but untouched. When they stepped back outside, the snow had stopped, leaving the streets slick and shining. "Thanks for the coffee," Ava said, "and for not asking me 100 fake nice questions. Thanks for not treating me like a resume." She smiled, quick, real, then turned toward the corner. "Good night, Adrian." He watched her walk away, the sound of her boots fading into the quiet street. She didn't look back, and for reasons he didn't care to name yet, he wished she had. The next morning, Adrian sat at the long walnut dining table in his penthouse, untouched breakfast cooling in front of him. The view from the floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the city, sunlight bouncing off rooftops dusted with snow. Normally, he would have gone straight into reading market reports or answering a stream of emails from his executive team. But this morning, the phone lay face down on the table, his laptop still closed. He kept thinking about Ava Collins. It wasn't her appearance, though there had been something grounding about the way her loose braid had framed her face when she sat across from him in that booth. It was the way she had listened without calculation, spoken without measuring the worth of his answers against what she might gain. Most people in his life didn't give without expecting a return. She had given her attention freely. It left a mark. By midday, he was supposed to attend a lunch with 3 potential investors, a meeting his assistant, Lydia, had described as an opportunity to control the narrative about the rumors swirling in the press. But instead of preparing his talking points, Adrian found himself searching for the number of the hotel where the gala had been held. "Maintenance department," said a brisk voice when he called. "This is Adrian Cole. I'm trying to reach someone named Ava Collins. She works janitorial shifts." There was a pause, followed by a polite but guarded tone. "I can't give out employee information, sir, but I can leave her a message if you like." He hesitated, then said, "Tell her the guy from the courtyard owes her another coffee." When he hung up, he felt oddly foolish. There was no guarantee she would call back, and if she did, she might think he was chasing a novelty. He'd seen it before, women intrigued by the idea of catching the attention of someone with his name, his status. The difference was, Ava didn't know what his name meant yet, and he wasn't sure he wanted her to. That evening, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "This the guy who owes me coffee?" He couldn't stop the smile that came. "Depends. Is this the keeper of spare water bottles and bad jokes?" "Guilty," she replied. "You busy tomorrow afternoon?" The question caught him off guard. Normally, his calendar dictated his life down to the minute. Tomorrow was already blocked for meetings, calls, and a dinner with a board member. But the thought of saying no felt heavier than the cost of rearranging his day. "Not anymore," he typed back. They met at a small cafe 2 blocks from the art supply store where Ava said she liked to browse on her days off. It was nothing like the polished establishments Adrian usually frequented. Mismatched chairs, chalkboard menus, the smell of cinnamon and espresso hanging in the air. She was already there when he arrived, sitting by the window in a sweater the color of forest moss, her hair loose this time. She looked different without the layers of work fatigue. Lighter somehow, though her gaze was still steady. "You're early," she said as he slid into the seat across from her. "I didn't want to miss you." Her lips quirked in amusement, but she didn't tease him for the line. "So, Adrian who runs a company, what do you do when you're not haunting gala courtyards?" "Mostly work," he admitted. "Too much work." You say that like you're aware it's a problem. It is, he said, but it's also safe. Ava stirred her coffee slowly, watching him. Safe is fine, but it's not living. Her words landed with more weight than she probably intended. He found himself wanting to explain, to tell her about the years since his father's death. The way running the company had become less of a choice and more of a duty. The way success had hardened into something cold and obligatory. But he stopped himself. He wasn't ready for her to see all of it. Instead, he asked about her. She told him about growing up in a neighborhood where you learned early how to stretch a dollar, about her younger brother Nate and how she worked double shifts to cover his tuition. She spoke of painting, how she hadn't picked up a brush in nearly a year, though her tiny apartment closet still held canvases and jars of stiffened brushes. I miss it, she admitted. But right now, survival wins over hobbies. It's more than a hobby, he said quietly. Her eyes flicked up to his, as if surprised he understood. Yeah, it is. They stayed until the light outside dimmed to the blue-gray of early evening. When they stepped out into the street, the air had that sharp edge of cold that hinted at more snow coming. Ava zipped her coat, glancing at him. You ever think about just walking away from all of it? The work, the expectations, the noise? She asked. Every day, he said. What stops you? Not knowing who I'd be without it. She studied him for a moment, then nodded, as though filing away his answer for later. See you around, Adrian. He watched her walk toward the subway entrance, blending into the crowd of commuters, and he realized with a strange certainty that if he didn't see her again soon, he'd feel the absence like a missing piece of himself. It had been 4 days since their last meeting, and Adrian's schedule had returned to its usual relentless rhythm, but it felt different now. He still sat in glass-walled conference rooms discussing expansion plans, still fielded calls from the legal team about potential acquisitions, still read quarterly reports late into the night. Yet threaded between those responsibilities were thoughts of Ava Collins. Small, uninvited interruptions that made him stop in the middle of typing an email just to remember the exact way she had said something, or how her gaze held steady even when she was challenging him. On Thursday afternoon, he was in his office on the top floor of Cole Tower when Lydia knocked and entered without waiting for a reply. You're expected at the Midtown Arts Fund dinner tomorrow, she said. I'm not going, Adrian replied. You've chaired that event 3 years in a row. Send someone else. She hesitated, as if weighing whether to press him. Fine, but you should know the press will notice. They always do, he said, and went back to his computer. After Lydia left, he leaned back in his chair, looking out at the city skyline. He knew he was avoiding the usual circuit of events, the very places where his absence would be read as weakness or scandal. But the truth was, he didn't want to be in those rooms anymore. Not after tasting what it was like to be in a space where his name meant nothing, where someone saw him as simply Adrian. That evening, as the city lights bled into the sky, he sent a message to Ava. Doing anything Saturday? She replied 15 minutes later, working the early shift. Why? I want to show you something. There was a pause before her next message. That sounds suspicious. Not dangerous, he wrote back. Just different. By Saturday afternoon, the air carried the smell of impending snow, heavy clouds pressing low over the rooftops. Adrian waited near the entrance of an old brick building on the east side. It was unassuming from the outside, its windows smudged. The sign above the door faded to near illegibility. When Ava arrived, wearing her paint-flecked denim jacket and a knit scarf, she eyed the building skeptically. "What is this?" she asked. "You'll see." Inside, the scent of turpentine and varnish hit immediately. The front space was filled with mismatched easels, scattered palettes, and canvases in various stages of completion. A few older men and women worked quietly, their brushes moving in measured strokes. A radio in the corner played something soft and instrumental. "This is a community art studio," Adrian said. "I fund it through a private grant. No fees, no memberships. Anyone can come in and work." Ava's steps slowed as she took in the room. "You pay for this?" "Yes. My father believed that art keeps people alive in ways nothing else can. I've tried to keep that part of his legacy intact." She stopped in front of an empty easel. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you told me you haven't painted in a year." Her fingers brushed the edge of the canvas, then curled into her palm. "I don't have time anymore." "Maybe you don't make time because you think it doesn't matter," he said gently. "But it does." She looked at him then, not with suspicion, but with something more complicated, as if part of her wanted to believe him and part of her didn't know how. "This is a lot for a second coffee date," she said, though her voice had softened. "Then let's call it something else." For the next 2 hours, Ava stood at that easel. She didn't say much, just dipped her brush into colors, mixed, wiped, started again. Adrian sat on a stool in the corner, watching without hovering. The more she worked, the more her shoulders relaxed, the more her focus narrowed until the rest of the room disappeared. When she finally stepped back, there was a small, satisfied curve to her mouth. "It's not finished," she said. "It doesn't have to be," he replied. "It just has to be yours." As they left, she glanced sideways at him. "You do realize I'm starting to suspect you're not just some guy who runs a company." "What gave me away?" "The fact that you have an art studio tucked in your back pocket." He smiled but said nothing. The next morning, his name was on the front page of the Sunday business section, an article speculating about his absence from several high-profile events. A photograph from a week ago, taken without his knowledge, showed him leaving Lou's diner. Ava wasn't in the frame, but he knew that night was the only time he'd been near that place in years. And if someone had been watching him then, it was only a matter of time before they noticed her. By Monday, the quiet bubble Adrian had built around his time with Ava began to fracture. He was halfway through a strategy meeting when Lydia slipped into the conference room and placed her phone in front of him. The screen showed a gossip site, the kind that thrived on unverified headlines and blurry paparazzi shots. "Who's the woman with Adrian Cole?" The headline read. Beneath it, a grainy photograph. Adrian and Ava walking out of the community art studio on Saturday, her scarf pulled up against the cold, his head tilted toward her as if she just said something worth hearing. His first reaction was irritation, not at the article but at the intrusion. The photo had been taken from across the street, the kind of distance that required both intent and patience. Someone had been following him. The comments under the article made his jaw tighten. Speculation about whether she was a mystery heiress or a gold digger. Assumptions about her job, her worth. None of them remotely close to the truth. He closed the phone and slid it back to Lydia. "Shut it down. We can get them to remove the photo," Lydia said. "But the damage is already done. Other outlets will pick it up." "Then we get ahead of it," he said. That evening, Adrian debated whether to warn Ava before she saw it herself. He didn't have her number memorized. Not yet. So he scrolled through their messages and typed, "We need to talk. Call me when you can." She didn't reply until late, nearly 10 p.m. "I saw it," He called immediately. Ava, is that really who you are? She asked, her voice steady but distant. He closed his eyes. Yes, my name is Adrian Cole. I run Cole Industries. A pause stretched on the line. You could have told me. I didn't want that to be the first thing you knew about me. And yet, it's apparently the first thing the rest of the city knows. He could hear the weight in her voice. Not anger exactly, but disappointment. The same tone she might use if a friend had kept a secret that changed everything. Can we talk in person? He asked. I have an early shift. I'll meet you after. She didn't agree, but she didn't hang up either. The next day, he was waiting outside the hotel when she finished work. She spotted him immediately, expression unreadable, and walked past the revolving door to where he stood. You lied, she said simply. I omitted, he countered. There's a difference. Not to me. You think I wouldn't have recognized your name eventually? Or did you assume I never read the news? I assumed, he said slowly, that if you knew from the start, you might treat me differently. And I didn't want that. She folded her arms, the winter air turning her breath into pale clouds. I didn't treat you differently when you were just Adrian who runs a company. And maybe that's why this hurts. Because you didn't give me the chance to prove it. He searched her face, but she wasn't looking for apologies. She was looking for truth. You've seen what people say about me, he said. The stories they tell, the angles they twist. I didn't want you dragged into that. And now here I am anyway, she replied. A group of hotel guests passed them, pulling rolling suitcases, their laughter breaking the tension for only a moment. Ava shifted her weight, as if ready to leave. I can protect you from this, Adrian said. That's not the point, she answered. The point is, I don't want to be someone you protect like I'm a liability. I want to be someone you trust enough to tell the truth to from the start. For a moment, all he could do was stand there, the cold biting through the fabric of his coat. She wasn't raising her voice, but every word landed sharper than if she had. Maybe I don't belong in your world, she said quietly. You belong wherever you decide you do, he replied. And I'd rather that be beside me. Her gaze softened for the briefest second. Then she stepped back. I need time. He let her walk away. The sight of her retreating into the evening crowd made something in his chest constrict. But he didn't follow. That night, Adrian sat alone in his penthouse, the city glittering beyond the glass. He poured himself a drink but left it untouched, staring instead at the faint reflection of himself in the window. He had built his life on control over his company, his image, his future. But with Ava, he had tried to control the one thing that couldn't be: how someone saw him. And in doing so, he might have lost the only person who had seen him clearly from the start. 3 days passed without a single word between them. For Adrian, those days felt heavier than weeks. He went through the motions at work, signing contracts, sitting in meetings, reviewing proposals, but every conversation felt like static in the background. He found himself glancing at his phone more often than he'd admit to anyone, waiting for a message that never came. By the 4th morning, he stopped waiting. If Ava wasn't going to reach out, then he would. But it couldn't be with another text or a half-measure apology. She had told him exactly what she needed: truth, and the choice to be part of his world without him deciding for her. He wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. He called Lydia into his office. Cancel my schedule for the afternoon. All of it. Everything? She asked, eyebrows lifting. Everything, he said. And call the community art studio. Tell them I'm hosting a private event there tonight." By early evening, the studio was transformed. The mismatched chairs and easels had been rearranged into an open space lit by strings of warm bulbs overhead. On one wall, a row of blank canvases waited, each with a set of brushes and fresh paints beside it. In the center of the room sat a single table with 2 mugs and a small plate of shortbread cookies. He wasn't sure if she would come. He'd sent only one message: "I have something to tell you. Please meet me at the studio. If you don't want to, I'll understand." When the door finally opened, she stepped inside wearing her denim jacket and a cautious expression. "This isn't coffee," she said, scanning the room. "No," Adrian replied. "It's a place where I don't have to be Adrian Cole, CEO. Just Adrian. The same way you're just Ava here, not someone the internet gets to define." She didn't move closer yet. "You set this up for me?" "I set this up for us," he said, "because I need you to know that when I kept my name from you, it wasn't because I thought you'd want me for it. It was because I wanted to hold on to the way you looked at me in that courtyard, like I was worth seeing even if you didn't know why. I've never had that before." Her eyes searched his face, weighing his words. He gestured toward the canvases. "You once told me survival wins over hobbies. That night, I realized I've been surviving too, in boardrooms, at galas, in rooms where I'm expected to play a part. But with you, I don't feel like I'm acting. I want to be in your world the same way you were in mine from the first moment, without conditions." Ava's hand tightened on the strap of her bag. "You don't get to control how people see you in my world either." "I know," he said, "but I'm willing to risk it, if it means standing there with you." Silence settled between them, broken only by the faint hum of the heating system. Finally, she walked toward the table and picked up one of the brushes. "So what's this? A paint your own apology kind of thing?" His mouth curved faintly. "Something like that." They stood at adjacent easels, dipping brushes into color. At first, they painted in silence, the soft scratch of bristles on canvas the only sound. Slowly, the tension eased. Ava began telling him about the first mural she ever painted, a sprawling scene of sunflowers on the wall of her aunt's garage, and he told her about how his father once spent an entire Saturday teaching him to mix paints, insisting that business and art required the same thing. Knowing what you wanted the final picture to be, but staying open to how you got there. When they finally stepped back from their canvases, neither was particularly skilled, but both were smiling. "I still don't know if your world and mine can fit together," Ava said, setting her brush down. "Then let's build a new one," Adrian replied. "One where no one gets to decide who belongs except us." Her gaze softened, and after a moment, she nodded. "I'm not promising forever. I'm promising today." "I'll take today," he said. They moved to the small table in the center of the room. Ava wrapped her hands around the warm mug, sipping slowly. Adrian didn't push the moment. He simply sat with her, letting the quiet be enough. When they left the studio, the snow had started again, dusting the sidewalk in a fresh white layer. As they walked side by side, their hands brushed once, then again until finally, without looking at each other, their fingers laced together. For the first time in weeks, Adrian felt the weight in his chest ease. Not because the world outside had changed, but because here, in this quiet stretch of street under the falling snow, it didn't matter. She had come back, and for now that was everything.